The rain hammered against the bulletproof glass of the command center like angry fists. Commander Jake Morrison stood behind the tactical display, watching red dots move across the digital map of Kandahar province. Each dot represented a life under his command, and tonight, those lives hung in the balance. "Sir, we have a problem," Lieutenant Sarah Chun called out from her position at the communications console. Her voice carried the weight of bad news that every commander dreaded hearing. Morrison turned toward her, his weathered face showing the strain of too many sleepless nights. At 42, he had led more missions than he cared to count, but something about tonight felt different. The intelligence reports had been sketchy, the weather was turning ugly, and his gut was telling him that they were walking into something bigger than anyone had planned for. "What's the situation, Chun?" Morrison asked, moving closer to her station. Sarah's fingers danced across her keyboard, pulling up satellite feeds and communication logs. "The reconnaissance team we sent ahead has gone silent. Last contact was 30 minutes ago. They were supposed to check in every 15 minutes. Morrison felt his stomach tighten. The reconnaissance team consisted of 4 of his best operators, including Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, the finest sniper he had ever worked with. Santos had joined his unit 6 months ago, transferring from a classified operation that nobody talked about. She was quiet, professional, and deadly accurate with a rifle. More importantly, she never missed a check-in. "Show me their last known position," Morrison ordered. The main display shifted to show an aerial view of a rocky valley, surrounded by steep hills. The target compound sat in the center, a collection of concrete buildings that intelligence claimed housed a high-value terrorist leader known only as the Ghost. For months, this man had been responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region. Here, Sarah pointed to a cluster of rocks about 800 meters from the compound. Santos and her team were supposed to establish overwatch positions on these ridges. Morrison studied the terrain. It was perfect sniper country, with clear lines of sight and multiple escape routes. If Santos had gone silent, it meant something had gone very wrong. "Any chatter on enemy frequencies?" Morrison asked. Technical Sergeant Mike Rodriguez looked up from his electronic warfare station. "Nothing unusual, sir. But that might not mean anything. These guys have been getting smarter about communications security." Morrison nodded. The enemy they faced tonight was not the typical insurgent group. Intelligence suggested they were dealing with foreign fighters, possibly former military personnel who understood modern tactics and technology. It was why this mission required his best people. "Sir," another voice called out. It was Captain Tom Bradley, Morrison's second-in-command. "The main assault team is in position and ready to move on your order." Morrison looked at the tactical display again. The plan had been simple in concept, but complex in execution. Santos and her reconnaissance team would establish overwatch positions and provide intelligence on enemy movements. Once they confirmed the target was present, the main assault team would move in for capture or kill. But plans only worked when everyone played their part, and right now, his eyes and ears on the target had vanished. "Rodriguez, can you raise them on the emergency frequency?" Morrison asked. "Already tried, sir. Nothing but static." Morrison felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. He had 2 choices: proceed with the mission blind or abort and lose the best intelligence they had gathered on the Ghost in months. Neither option felt right. "Sir," Sarah interrupted his thoughts. "I'm getting reports from the outer perimeter. Sergeant Walsh says he's seeing movement in the hills." Staff Sergeant Kevin Walsh commanded the security team responsible for protecting their insertion point. He was a veteran of 3 deployments and not prone to false alarms. "What kind of movement?" Morrison asked. Sarah listened to her headset for a moment. "He says it looks like someone is repositioning, possibly setting up for an ambush." Morrison felt the pieces clicking together in his mind. The reconnaissance team's silence, movement in the hills, and the enemy's improved operational security all pointed to one conclusion. They had walked into a trap. "Get me Walsh on the radio," Morrison ordered. Sarah made the connection, and Walsh's voice crackled through the speakers. "Command, this is Perimeter 6. I've got at least 20 hostiles moving into position on the high ground. They're carrying heavy weapons and look like they know what they're doing. Can you determine their intentions?" Morrison asked. "Sir, based on their positioning, I'd say they're planning to cut off our extraction routes. This feels like a coordinated operation. Morrison cursed silently. The Ghost had somehow learned about the mission and turned the tables on them. Instead of hunting a terrorist leader, they had become the hunted. Bradley. Morrison called to his second-in-command. What's the status of our backup extraction? Bradley consulted his tablet. Nearest helicopter support is 20 minutes out. But if the weather gets worse, that could stretch to 30 or 40 minutes. Through the command center's windows, Morrison could see lightning flashing in the distance. The storm that had been threatening all evening was finally arriving, and it would make air support nearly impossible. Sir, Rodriguez suddenly spoke up. I'm picking up radio chatter. They're speaking in a mix of languages, but I can make out some English. They definitely know we're here. Morrison made his decision. All units, this is command. We are dealing with a prepared enemy force. The mission parameters have changed. We are now in a defensive posture until extraction arrives. He turned to Sarah. Send a flash message to headquarters. Tell them we need immediate air support and backup extraction options. As Sarah began typing rapidly, Morrison studied the tactical display one more time. His forces were spread across several miles of rough terrain, with the main assault team closest to the enemy compound and the security teams holding the perimeter. Somewhere in between, Santos and her reconnaissance team were either captured, dead, or hiding. Command, this is Alpha Team Leader. A new voice came through the speakers. It was Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, leading the main assault team. We can see the compound, but something doesn't feel right. Too quiet. No normal activity patterns. Morrison keyed his microphone. Alpha Team, hold your position. Do not advance on the compound. We have reason to believe this is a trap. Copy that, Command. We'll dig in and wait for orders. The next few minutes passed in tense silence as Morrison and his team tried to piece together their situation. The enemy had somehow anticipated their mission and prepared accordingly. But how much did they know? And, more importantly, what were they planning? The answer came sooner than Morrison expected. Sir, Rodriguez called out urgently. I'm intercepting communications. They're coordinating a multi-pronged attack. It sounds like they have us surrounded. Morrison felt his blood run cold. A coordinated ambush in this terrain could be devastating. His forces were spread thin, the weather was deteriorating, and air support might not arrive in time. Bradley, give me a situation report from all units. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. As Bradley began coordinating with the various team leaders, Morrison found himself thinking about Maria Santos. She was more than just his best sniper. She was a natural leader who inspired confidence in everyone around her. If she was still alive and operational, she could be their best hope for turning this situation around. But where was she? The answer to that question would prove more crucial than Morrison could possibly imagine. Because 800 meters away, hidden in a rocky outcropping that provided perfect concealment, Santos was very much alive and watching everything unfold through the scope of her rifle. She had seen the enemy forces moving into position hours before anyone else. She had watched them prepare their ambush with military precision, and she had made a decision that would either save her fellow SEALs or get them all killed. Santos had broken radio silence not because she couldn't communicate, but because she was deep in enemy territory, gathering intelligence that could change everything. She had counted over 60 hostile fighters, identified their weapons and positions, and discovered something that made her blood run cold. The Ghost was not just in the compound. He was personally leading the ambush, coordinating with foreign fighters who had brought sophisticated equipment and tactics to this remote corner of Afghanistan. This was not a simple raid on a terrorist hideout. This was a carefully planned trap designed to eliminate an entire SEAL unit. Through her rifle scope, Santos watched enemy snipers taking positions on the surrounding hills. They had night vision equipment, suppressed weapons, and fields of fire that covered every possible escape route. Her fellow SEALs were walking into a killing zone, and they didn't even know it. Santos made a calculation that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She could try to contact command and warn them, but doing so would reveal her position and eliminate any chance of surprise. Or she could remain hidden and wait for the right moment to act. She chose to wait. For the next 30 minutes, Santos watched the enemy complete their preparations. They moved with the efficiency of professional soldiers, not the chaotic enthusiasm of typical insurgents. Someone had trained these fighters, and that someone understood American tactics. As the storm clouds gathered overhead, Santos realized that the weather might actually work in their favor. The rain and lightning would mask sound and interfere with some of the enemy's sophisticated equipment. But it would also make her job much harder. Through her earpiece, she listened to the radio chatter from command. She heard Morrison's growing concern, Bradley's tactical assessments, and the worried reports from the perimeter teams. She wanted desperately to reassure them that she was alive and operational, but she knew that patience might be their only advantage. The enemy had planned this ambush carefully, but they had made one critical error. They had assumed that the American forces would react predictably to the trap. They expected panic, confusion, and disorganized attempts to escape. What they had not planned for was a highly trained sniper with a clear view of their entire operation and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. As Santos settled into her firing position and began calculating ranges and wind speeds, she thought about the oath she had taken when she became a SEAL. She had sworn to protect her teammates, to complete the mission, and to never leave a fallen comrade behind. Tonight, she would honor that oath in a way that none of them would ever forget. But first, she had to survive the next few minutes, because the enemy was about to spring their trap, and when they did, the night would explode into chaos and violence that would test every skill she had ever learned. Santos took a deep breath, placed her finger on the trigger, and waited for the moment that would change everything. In the distance, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the battlefield where the fate of her unit would be decided. The real fight was about to begin. The first shot came without warning, a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding hills. Through her scope, Santos watched as one of the enemy snipers on the eastern ridge suddenly slumped forward, his weapon clattering down the rocky slope. She had made her choice. The enemy's ambush had been perfectly planned, but they had not accounted for a sniper already behind their lines. Santos had spent the last hour identifying the most dangerous threats to her team, and she was systematically eliminating them one by one. Her rifle was a customized M110 semi-automatic sniper system, capable of precise shots at distances exceeding 800 meters. Tonight, she was using match-grade ammunition and had compensated for the wind that was picking up as the storm approached. Every shot had to count. The second target was a machine gunner positioned to cover the main escape route. Santos adjusted her aim for the crosswind and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped behind his weapon, and Santos immediately shifted to her next target. But the enemy was not unprepared for counter-sniper operations. Within seconds of her second shot, muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions as they began suppressing the area where they thought she might be hiding. Santos had anticipated this response. She had chosen her position not just for the excellent field of view, but for the multiple concealment options it provided. As bullets began impacting the rocks around her, she low-crawled 30 meters to a secondary position she had prepared earlier. From this new angle, she could see something that made her blood run cold. The enemy had brought a mortar team, and they were setting up to rain indirect fire on her fellow SEALs' positions. If those mortars opened fire, the rocky terrain that provided cover from small arms would become a death trap as high-explosive rounds detonated overhead. Santos keyed her radio for the first time in over an hour. "Command, this is Santos. Do you copy?" The response was immediate and filled with relief. "Santos, where the hell have you been? We thought you were dead." "I'm alive and operational, sir. But we have a serious problem. The enemy has mortars, and they're about to use them. I can see the entire enemy force from my position." Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece. "What's your tactical assessment?" "Sir, we're facing approximately 60 hostiles with military-grade equipment and training. They have snipers on the high ground, machine gun teams covering the escape routes, and a mortar team that's almost ready to fire. This is a coordinated ambush." There was a pause before Morrison responded. "Can you disrupt their operation?" Santos looked through her scope at the mortar team. They were 400 meters away, partially concealed behind a low wall. A difficult shot in perfect conditions, nearly impossible in the wind and rain that was now beginning to fall. "I can try, sir, But I need the assault team to create a distraction. If I reveal my position to take out the mortars, the other snipers will zero in on me. Understood. Alpha Team, did you copy that? Lieutenant Thompson's voice came through the radio. We heard it, Command. We can create some noise on the northern approach to draw their attention. Santos smiled grimly. Thompson was a good officer who understood that sometimes the best plan was organized chaos. If his team opened fire from an unexpected direction, it might give her the few seconds she needed to eliminate the mortar threat. On my mark, Santos said, settling into her firing position and calculating the distance to the mortar team. 3, 2, 1 mark. The hillside erupted with gunfire as Alpha Team opened up with everything they had. Tracers streaked through the darkness, and the enemy forces immediately began responding to what appeared to be a direct assault on their position. In the confusion, Santos took her shot. The mortar team leader dropped immediately, but the other team members began scrambling to complete their setup. Santos worked her bolt and fired again, then, again, putting down 2 more members of the mortar team before they could respond. But her position was compromised now. Enemy fire began concentrating on her area, forcing her to move again. As she crawled toward her next position, she heard Morrison's voice on the radio. All units, this is Command. We have multiple enemy forces in prepared positions. Santos has disrupted their mortar team, but we are still heavily outnumbered. Air support is delayed due to weather. We need to hold our positions until extraction arrives. Santos reached her 3rd firing position and immediately began scanning for new targets. Through her scope, she could see that her actions had disrupted the enemy's carefully planned ambush, but they were adapting quickly. Professional soldiers always did. She spotted movement near the compound and adjusted her scope to get a better look. What she saw made her heart race. A tall man in military fatigues was directing the enemy forces with hand signals and radio communications. Even in the darkness and rain, she could tell this was someone important. Command, I have eyes on what appears to be the primary target. Adult male, military bearing, coordinating enemy operations from the compound. Can you confirm identity? Morrison asked. Santos studied the figure through her scope. Intelligence photos of the ghost were limited and of poor quality, but the man she was watching matched the general description. More importantly, the way other fighters deferred to him suggested high rank and authority. Reasonable confidence, this is our target, sir. What's your shot probability? Santos calculated the distance, wind speed, and visibility. The target was over 600 meters away, moving unpredictably and partially obscured by other fighters. In good weather with perfect conditions, it would be a challenging shot. Tonight, it bordered on impossible. Low probability, sir. Long range, poor visibility, moving target. Hold position and continue surveillance. Do not take the shot unless you have high confidence. Santos understood the order, but she also understood something else. The ghost was not just coordinating the ambush. He was preparing to escape. She could see vehicles being moved into position near the back of the compound. If he got away tonight, they might never have another chance to find him. As she watched, the tactical situation continued to deteriorate for her team. The enemy had regrouped after her initial disruption and was now systematically advancing on SEAL positions. Without air support, her fellow operators were in serious danger. Command, this is Perimeter 6. Walsh's voice came through the radio, strained with urgency. We have multiple hostiles advancing on our position. Request permission to fall back. Perimeter 6, hold your position as long as possible. We cannot afford to lose the extraction point. Santos knew that Walsh and his team were in an impossible situation. They had to hold the landing zone for helicopter extraction, but they were facing overwhelming numbers. Through her scope, she could see enemy fighters moving through the rocks toward their position. She made another impossible shot, dropping an enemy fighter who was flanking Walsh's team. Then another. But for every fighter she eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. Alpha Team, this is Command. What's your status? Thompson's voice was tight with stress. We're holding, but barely. We've taken casualties and are running low on ammunition. These guys are better than anything we've faced before. Santos felt the weight of the entire operation on her shoulders. From her elevated position, She could see the tactical picture more clearly than anyone else. The enemy was executing a textbook operation, using superior numbers and prepared positions to systematically destroy her unit. But they had made one critical error. They had focused so much attention on the SEAL teams that they had forgotten about the lone sniper, who was picking apart their operation from the shadows. Santos had eliminated their mortar team, several snipers, and at least 8 other fighters. But, more importantly, she had disrupted their coordination and forced them to fight reactively instead of according to their plan. The storm was getting worse now, with heavy rain and frequent lightning that illuminated the battlefield in stark, momentary clarity. The weather that had initially worked against her was now becoming an advantage. The enemy's sophisticated equipment was being degraded by the moisture, and their movements were becoming more predictable as they sought shelter from the elements. Santos saw her opportunity. The Ghost had moved to a more exposed position near the compound's main building, apparently trying to coordinate with vehicle drivers who were struggling with the muddy conditions. For just a moment, he was standing in the open with no cover between him and her rifle. It was still an incredibly difficult shot. Over 600 meters in wind and rain, with lightning creating unpredictable light conditions. But Santos had trained for exactly this kind of scenario. She had spent hundreds of hours on shooting ranges in all weather conditions, learning to compensate for variables that would make lesser shooters miss. She settled into her shooting position, controlled her breathing, and began the mental calculations that would determine whether the shot was possible. Wind speed, bullet drop, target movement, scope adjustment. Through her earpiece, she could hear her teammates fighting for their lives. Walsh's team was being overwhelmed. Alpha Team was running out of ammunition. The command element was requesting emergency extraction that might not arrive in time. Santos placed her crosshairs on the Ghost and began her firing sequence. She would have one shot, maybe 2 if she was lucky. After that, every enemy sniper would know exactly where she was, and her position would become untenable. She thought about her teammates, about the oath she had taken, about the mission that had brought them all to this remote valley in Afghanistan. Everything came down to this moment, this shot, this decision. Santos took a deep breath, let half of it out, and gently squeezed the trigger. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder, and she immediately worked the bolt to chamber another round. Through the rain and darkness, she watched the Ghost stumble and fall. But she could not tell if he was hit or simply taking cover. Enemy fire immediately began concentrating on her position with renewed intensity. Bullets whined off the rocks around her as she tried to confirm the results of her shot. She had to move again, and quickly. As Santos crawled toward her final prepared position, she heard something that made her heart race with hope. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance, barely audible over the storm and gunfire. Air support was finally arriving. But the enemy heard it too, and Santos watched through her scope as the Ghost's fighters began scattering toward previously prepared escape routes. The ambush was falling apart, but the most important question remained unanswered. Had her shot found its mark? And would her teammates survive long enough to be extracted? The answers to those questions would determine whether this night ended in victory or disaster. But as Santos settled into her final position and prepared for whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. She had given everything she had to give, and sometimes that was all a warrior could do. The sound of incoming helicopters grew louder, but Santos knew they were still minutes away from being able to help. Through her scope, she watched enemy fighters streaming away from the compound in all directions, their carefully planned ambush dissolving into chaos. But the Ghost was not among them. Santos had lost sight of her target after taking the shot, and now she needed to know if he was dead, wounded, or simply hiding. The intelligence value of capturing or confirming the death of such a high-value target could not be overstated. Command, this is Santos. I need eyes on the compound. Can Alpha Team advance to confirm target status? Morrison's voice was strained as he coordinated multiple crisis situations simultaneously. Negative, Santos. Alpha Team is pinned down and taking heavy casualties. We need immediate extraction for wounded personnel. Through her earpiece, Santos could hear the sounds of intense combat. Her teammates were fighting desperately just to stay alive, and She was asking them to risk more lives for a mission that might already be complete. But something told her that the ghost was still alive. Her shot had been hurried, taken under impossible conditions. The probability of a clean kill at that range in those weather conditions was low, and she was too honest with herself to believe otherwise. "Sir," Santos said, making a decision that would define the rest of her military career, "request permission to advance on the compound alone. I can move unseen and confirm target status." "Absolutely not," Morrison replied immediately. "You will not advance alone into an enemy stronghold. That's an order." Santos looked through her scope at the compound, now barely visible through the increasing rain and darkness. Most of the enemy fighters had fled, but she could still see movement near the main building. Someone was still there, and her instincts told her it was the ghost. She thought about the months of intelligence gathering that had led to this night, the countless hours spent analyzing communication intercepts and movement patterns, the lives lost to the ghost's terrorist operations, the opportunity that might never come again. "Sir, with respect, this is why we came here tonight. If he escapes, we might never get another chance. Santos, you are not to advance on that compound. We will call in airstrikes once our people are clear. But airstrikes would destroy any evidence and leave questions about whether the ghost had actually been present." Santos knew that intelligence officials would debate the results for months, and meanwhile, terrorist operations would continue. She made a choice that went against every regulation and order she had ever received. "Command, I'm moving to investigate." "Santos out." Santos switched off her radio before Morrison could respond and began moving down the hillside toward the compound. She left her sniper rifle in position and drew her sidearm, a customized .45 caliber pistol that had never failed her in close combat. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the rocky terrain slippery and treacherous. But it also provided cover, masking the sound of her movement and reducing visibility for anyone who might be watching. As she approached the outer perimeter of the compound, Santos could see that most of the buildings were dark and apparently empty. But lights were still on in the main structure, and she could hear voices speaking in what sounded like Arabic mixed with heavily accented English. Santos moved carefully from building to building, using techniques she had learned in urban warfare training. The compound was larger than it had appeared from her sniper position, with multiple structures connected by covered walkways and defensive positions. She reached the main building and pressed herself against the wall beside a window. Through the glass, she could see 3 figures inside, one of whom was clearly wounded and being treated by the others. Even in the dim light, she recognized the tall frame and distinctive profile of the man she had shot. The ghost was alive, but he was hurt badly. Santos could see blood on his left shoulder and arm, and he was having difficulty moving. Her shot had found its mark, but not fatally. Santos faced a tactical decision that would affect the rest of the mission. She could attempt to capture the ghost alive, which would provide maximum intelligence value, but also maximum risk. Or she could eliminate him from outside the building and extract immediately. Through her earpiece, which she had turned back on but kept on low volume, she could hear Morrison coordinating the helicopter extraction. The birds were only minutes away, and her teammates needed immediate medical evacuation. But this opportunity might never come again. Santos checked her ammunition and prepared to enter the building. She had trained for close-quarters combat in hostile environments, but she had never attempted to single-handedly capture a high-value target while surrounded by potential enemies. She moved to the building's main entrance, a heavy wooden door that appeared to be unlocked. Through her training, she knew that the element of surprise was her greatest advantage. If she could enter quickly and establish control of the situation before the occupants could react, she might be able to complete the capture. Santos took a deep breath and burst through the door. The first man she encountered was reaching for an AK-47 leaning against the wall. Santos put 2 rounds in his chest before he could touch the weapon. The second man turned toward her with a pistol in his hand, but Santos was faster. Her third and fourth shots dropped him before he could fire. The ghost stood in the center of the room, his wounded left arm hanging useless at his side, his right hand empty and raised slightly in a gesture that might have been surrender or preparation to fight. "Do not move," Santos said in Arabic, one of the few phrases she had memorized for exactly this situation. The ghost smiled, a cold expression that did not reach his eyes. When he spoke, it was in heavily accented but grammatically correct English. "You are the sniper who has been causing so much trouble tonight." Santos kept her weapon trained on his center mass while scanning the room for additional threats. "You are under arrest by authority of the United States military." "I think not," the ghost replied. "Your people are dying outside while you play games in here. How many of your friends will die while you waste time with me?" It was a psychological attack designed to create doubt and hesitation, but Santos had been trained to resist such manipulation. She had a job to do, and she would complete it regardless of the cost. "On your knees, hands behind your head," she ordered. The ghost complied slowly, favoring his wounded arm. But as he moved, Santos noticed something that made her blood run cold. His right hand was moving towards something hidden beneath his clothing. She had a split second to make a decision that would determine whether she lived or died. Santos fired twice, both rounds hitting the ghost in the chest. He collapsed forward, whatever weapon he had been reaching for clattering to the floor beside him. Santos approached carefully and confirmed that he was dead before searching the room for intelligence materials. She found documents, computer equipment, and communication devices that could provide valuable information about terrorist operations throughout the region. But she also heard something outside that made her realize how precarious her situation had become. Vehicle engines and shouting voices indicated that enemy reinforcements were arriving. Santos grabbed what intelligence materials she could carry and prepared to fight her way out of the compound. She had accomplished the primary mission objective, but now she had to survive long enough to report it. As she moved toward the building's rear exit, her radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Santos, where are you? We have helicopters inbound for extraction in 2 minutes. Command, target is confirmed dead. I have intelligence materials and am moving to extraction point." "Santos, you disobeyed a direct order. We will discuss this later. Right now, I need you to get out of there alive." Santos smiled grimly as she checked her remaining ammunition. She had enough for perhaps one more firefight, but she would have to be smart about how she used it. The rear exit led to a covered walkway that connected to the compound's vehicle bay. If she could reach one of the enemy vehicles, she might be able to drive to the extraction point before the reinforcements could organize an effective pursuit. But as she stepped outside, she found herself facing 4 enemy fighters who had positioned themselves to cut off exactly this escape route. The firefight was brief, but intense. Santos used every technique she had learned in close-quarters combat training, moving and shooting while using the compound's architecture for cover. When it was over, 3 of the enemy fighters were down, and the 4th was wounded and fleeing. Santos commandeered a pickup truck and drove hard toward the extraction point, enemy rounds impacting around her as she navigated the rough terrain in darkness. The helicopter landing zone was only a kilometer away, but it felt like the longest drive of her life. She arrived at the extraction point just as the first helicopter was touching down. Through the rain and rotor wash, she could see her teammates carrying wounded personnel toward the aircraft. The sight of familiar faces filled her with relief and determination. Santos parked the truck and ran toward the helicopter, carrying the intelligence materials she had recovered from the compound. As she climbed aboard, she saw Morrison waiting for her with an expression that combined relief, anger, and professional respect. "Is he dead?" Morrison asked over the noise of the rotors. "Confirmed," Santos replied, handing him the documents and computer equipment. "And we have his intelligence materials." Morrison nodded and spoke into his headset, coordinating with the aircrew and other helicopters in the formation. As their aircraft lifted off and banked away from the valley, Santos looked down at the compound where she had just completed the most important mission of her career. The storm was finally passing, and patches of clear sky were visible between the clouds. In a few hours, the sun would rise on a world where the ghost no longer posed a threat to coalition forces or innocent civilians. Santos had disobeyed direct orders and risked everything on a solo mission that should have been impossible to survive. But she had also eliminated a high-value target and recovered intelligence that would save countless lives in future operations. As the helicopter carried them towards safety, Morrison leaned over to speak directly in her ear. "What you did tonight was completely unacceptable from a disciplinary standpoint. You violated orders and put yourself at unnecessary risk." Santos nodded, understanding that formal consequences would follow. But Morrison was not finished speaking. It was also the kind of courage and tactical brilliance that defines what it means to be a SEAL. "The shot you made, the intelligence you gathered, and the leadership you showed under impossible circumstances will be studied and remembered for years to come." Santos felt a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction as the helicopter flew through the night toward their base. She had faced the most challenging situation of her military career and emerged victorious, but she also understood that such victories always came with a price. The other SEALs on the helicopter looked at her with a combination of awe and respect. She had done something that night that none of them would ever forget. When their unit had faced defeat, when the mission had seemed impossible, she had found a way to turn disaster into victory through skill, courage, and determination. As they flew toward the dawn, Santos thought about the oath she had taken when she became a SEAL. She had sworn to protect her teammates, complete the mission, and never leave a fallen comrade behind. Tonight, she had honored that oath in the most profound way possible. And, in doing so, she had proven that sometimes one person with the right skills and the courage to use them could change the course of history. The night when the SEALs had feared defeat had become the night when their finest sniper had shown them what victory looked like.